When we talk about knee health, we often focus mostly on quad strength, which actually helps decelerate knee flexion or slows down the bending of the knee so that if we're going into squats or walking downhill, the quads can help the knee to manage that stress of the body weight coming down onto it. But what about the other half of it, the hamstrings? So the hamstrings accelerate knee flexion, and they also help with hip extension. So by strengthening the hamstrings, we are going to be making hip extension better, which is used in walking, and we're going to be making knee flexion, the acceleration of that knee flexion, stronger, which is used in running. So by strengthening the hamstrings, we're going to be just basically strengthening the other half of the function of the knee joint. We're going to go through some mobility drills for knee flexion so that we own our deepest ranges of motion in that knee bent position. We're doing all of these today in hip extension. So the hip is going to be extended, meaning if you have wrinkles in the front of your pants, we're going to try to flatten out those wrinkles by extending at that hip. Like I said before, the hamstrings also help with that hip extension along with the glutes. So we're going to be focusing on that posterior chain of glutes and hamstrings to extend at the hip and to bend that knee. So we'll go through some passive ranges, isometrics, we'll go through some holds, lift-offs, and finish with hovers for that knee flexion. The goal of today is to use as little equipment as possible. So we're going to be using just a yoga block and possibly something to hold on to for support like a wall or a stick. All right, so let's get started. We're going to start by lying face down and getting into a quad stretch. So we're getting into our passive range knee flexion. So if this is difficult for you to reach the knee, to reach the foot behind you, you can grab onto a strap or a towel. If not, you're just going to be lying face down and we're going to grab that right foot and try to pull it towards your hip. So we're going to be stretching here for a little bit and then we'll work into some isometrics. So we're going to press the right hip into the ground. We're going to bend that right knee and find our stretch in knee flexion. So like I said before, we're doing all of this in hip extension. So you might feel a stretch on the front of the hip. You might feel a stretch in the quads, which is all good. That's going to help open up that front of the body, or front of the leg and the hip, so that we can access more of that knee flexion in the posterior chain. So we're just going to hang out here, breathing into that stretch. You want to try to pull that heel as close to your hip as you can. Try not to let that right hip fall away from the wall, the floor. Try not to let the legs scooch out to the side. We want those legs to be squeezing towards each other. And we want to try not to let the foot fall inside of the hip or the knee. We want that knee to be straight out from the hip and the foot to be pulling straight into the knee, not to the inside or outside. So we're going to activate this stretch by actively driving that hip further into the ground. And that's going to engage the glutes and some of the hamstrings here. So we are actively pushing that right hip into the ground to stretch this out. Then we're going to go into some isometrics. So now we're going to push the right foot into the right hand as if you're trying to straighten that knee. So we're going to be using the front of the leg and the knee to do that motion, the quads. But the right arm is not going to let that happen. So you're going to push into the right hand, but nothing's actually going to move. So you're going to feel those quads working and that knee tightness in the front of that knee to try to straighten that leg. Keep pushing into that right hand. The right hand is still pushing that right foot towards the right heel. And then immediately we're going to try to reverse that tension. So you're going to try to take that right foot out of the right hand by bending further into that stretch. It's like you're actively trying to pull further into that stretch, but the right hand is not pushing that foot. You are actively trying to take that foot out of the right hand as if that right hand is staying in that same space. And then we're going to release that tension and see if we can get a little further into that stretch. And we're going to do those isometrics 2 more times. It's a little hard to comprehend at first. So the more you practice it, the more it'll start to make sense to you. We're going to push into that right hand as if you're trying to straighten that knee, but that right arm's not going to let it happen. We're feeling the front of the knee and the quads trying to do this action. 3, 2, 1. And then we're going to reverse it, immediately trying to find the posterior side of that thigh, the hamstrings and those glutes, trying to bend that knee further, actively pulling deeper into that stretch. Of course, we're not actually able to take the foot away from the hand, and then release the tension. We're gonna do that one more time. As you exhale, push into that right hand like we're trying to straighten that knee. Keep pushing, 3, 2, 1, and then reverse it. Try to take it out of that right hand. Of course, we're not going to be able to. This is all isometrics. If you can, let's say you can take it out of that right hand, then the right hand is going to try to just meet that foot where it's at, and you're going to try to pull even further away from that hand. And then we're going to release the tension into that stretch. And then we're slowly going to come out of that position. Okay, so now we've found our passive range and we've worked some isometrics in that range. Let's see if we can actively hold that passive range. So we're going to start on the floor and progress to standing if that's accessible for you today. So we'll grab back onto that right foot. We're sticking with this right side. And we're going to go into that passive range again, driving that hip into the floor, making sure those legs are squeezing together. We're going to try to let go of that right foot and try to maintain as much knee flexion as possible. So as you let go, try not to let that foot fall away from you. And here's where the cramping starts. So we might feel an immediate cramp in those hamstrings, and that's okay. Just punch it out and get back into it. And then we're going to grab back onto that foot and pull into that passive range. Let's take a deep breath. And slowly exhale and let that leg go. So we will see some drop off here between the passive range and the active range. You won't be able to actively hold that knee flexion. And if you can, if this is easy for you, go ahead, grab back onto that foot. Then we're gonna do this from standing up for our last 3 reps. If that lying down felt good, if you're cramping there, let's stick with that progression. If you can stand up, we can finish our last 3 reps. In this position, we're just gonna take a standing quad stretch. Make sure that the knee doesn't go in front of you. So when you're on the floor, you have the floor to block, so the knee doesn't go in front of you. Right, so we're just imagining that we're still lying on the floor and trying to push that knee back. We're gonna let go and hold. 5, 4, 3. Try to keep bending higher and higher with that foot. Grab back on. Release. We're gonna try not to come out of that position unless you've got a major cramp going on. As you exhale, we're gonna let go and hold. Keep trying to bend that knee, pull the foot towards the heel, pull the heel towards the butt. And grab back on. Take a breath. Like I said, we'll naturally get some drop off, but we're trying to avoid as much of that as possible. One more time, let go and hold. 5, 4, keep bending. 3, come on, more. 2, 1, and then grab back on. All right, so let's slowly come out of that stretch, okay? We might feel a lot of tightness in that hamstring, but we're not done yet. We're gonna keep with that right side. We're gonna go into some liftoff. So the first liftoff we're gonna do is a hip extension liftoff in knee flexion. So we'll come back down to the floor if you were standing, and we'll grab our yoga block, and we're gonna place it behind us. We'll go into a quadruped position, hands and knees. We're gonna collapse it down towards the floor, and then we're gonna try to lift the leg away from the yoga block. So your back knee is going to be on the block. So if I start on my hands and knees position, reach this leg slightly behind. Okay, I'm going to bend that knee, right knee as much as I can. I'm going to scooch that left knee forward. I'm going to bring my chest down towards the floor. Basically, I'm just trying to get my hips as close to the ground as possible where I can still lift off, but it's going to be a challenge. Okay, so I've got my body down. I've got my spine locked into flexion, so we don't want to arch that back. We don't want to lift from the back. We want to scoop that tailbone under and lift from that rounded position. So I'm going to open my hands wide and bring my head close to the floor. That's going to promote that spinal flexion. Bend your knees so you're actively pulling the heel towards the butt. And then we're going to use the hamstrings and the glutes to lift that knee off the block and hold. 3, 2, 1, and bring that leg down. So you'll notice that I'm barely able to lift off of this block. That's exactly what we want. Again, exhale, lift and hold. We're working that hip extension and knee flexion at the same time at end range, which means that lift off is going to be very small. If you're up here and you're able to lift really high, then you're going to want to shift closer to the floor with those hips. Let's lift off again. So we're still feeling engagement in the hamstring, especially as we lift into that hip extension. And down. Exhale as you lift. Try not to let the upper body move as you lift that leg. We all want all of this motion to happen from the hip. And down. Last one. Exhale as you lift. And down. All right. Slowly come out of that. We're going to do one more version of knee flexion liftoffs. This time we're going to get a little more specific into the knee flexion. We're going to lift off from a half kneeling position. So the hip is going to remain in extension, just like we were remaining in extension with the stretch and the hold. And now we're going to lift just off into knee flexion. So we're going to go with the right knee down. Your right foot is going to be elevated on your yoga block. The lower that block is to the floor, the easier it's going to be to lift from. But again, we want to work at end range, so we want to make it difficult and challenging. So the right knee is down. The right foot is on the block behind you. We're going to focus on extending this right hip. So I'm scooping the tailbone under, and again, getting the wrinkles of the front of my pants out by scooping under and lengthening the front of my hip. That, again, is that hip extension. So you're going to press into the left leg, the top of the left thigh. You're going to take a deep breath. And as you exhale, we're going to lift off into more knee flexion, trying to pull that heel close to your butt and hold and bring that foot back down. As you lift off, try not to sit the hips back. We want to keep that hip extension, keep those glutes engaged. Again, exhale as you lift off. 3, 2, 1, and come back down. Once again, we're going to get some cramps here, which is normal if you're just starting out. The more you do this movement, the easier it will be, the fewer cramps you'll feel. And again, exhale, lifting up. 3, 2, 1, and down. And again, lifting up. 3, 2, 1, and down. Your foot could be pointed or flexed here. It doesn't really matter as long as you're feeling those glutes and the hamstrings. Last one, lift up and hold. 3, 2, 1, and rest. All right, so we've got one more movement with that right knee. We're going to do some hovers, so we're going to go into some hip rotation with this work as well. We're keeping the hip extended, we're bending at the knee, but we're working through a more full range of motion, hovering over the yoga block. A lot of times in our lifestyles today, we are not usually working in that end range knee flexion, getting our full use out of our hamstring muscles, which can cause injury in the hip and injury in the knees. So this is why we are working at a full range of motion and especially stressing that end range of motion, because if you're cramping, then you know that you haven't done that movement in a while and your tissues are kind of like, what is this? They're just trying to figure it out. So we want to really bring that movement back to the hamstrings and the back of the leg so that the knees are a little bit more prepared, so that the knees are less likely to get injured. So let's go into our hovers. I'll show you from the back this way. We're going to start in that half kneeling position again, and the block is going to be just outside the foot, which is going to start just inside of the knee. Okay, so I'm already starting with that hip slightly externally rotated. You want the block to be right behind the knee. Again, the higher the block, the harder it's going to be, and the closer towards the knee, the harder it's going to be to hover over. Okay, so hips are square, and we're thinking of that hip extension on the right hip again. Glutes are squeezing. We're going to lift the foot up, bending the knee as much as you can. We're going to hover over the block and bring the foot down. So we're hovering in that knee flexion, but the hip is going to be rotating. So as I lift up and I rotate, hover over the block, the top of my thigh is now going to point outside towards the outside of my body. So then as I lift up again, the top of my thigh is going to point in towards the inside of my body. And let's lift up from here and hover back in and down. So I'll show you from this angle. We're going to do 3 more. So right now the top of my thigh is facing this way. I'm going to lift up, hover into internal rotation, even though my foot's going out. And then lift up from here, hover back into external rotation. Top of the thigh is going to point out. Let's go 2 more. So we're going to hit different angles of those hamstring muscles. And hover back into external. And we'll go 1 more time, lifting up, hovering over. Try to keep that torso nice and still. Try not to sit the hips back, scoop under. as we hover our last rep and rest. All right. So now the right side is going to get to rest while we work the left side. So let's start in that passive range once again with those isometrics. So we're going to lie face down. You're going to grab that left foot and you're going to pull into that quad and hip extension stretch. Here, driving that left hip into the floor. We're just going to kind of hang out here. Make sure that the legs are squeezing towards each other. Make sure that the foot is not outside or inside of that hip. We want it pulling straight up to the middle of that hip. We want to feel a stretch in the quads in the front of the hip. Okay, and we want to then start activating that stretch by driving the hip into the floor more and really feeling those glutes start to engage. Deep breaths. Each time you exhale, you're going to try to pull further into that stretch. And yeah, you're going to feel some tension in the upper body as well. That left bicep is really pulling that left foot towards your heel, and just a little extra bonus bicep work, I guess. So as we exhale, we're going to start to go into our isometrics. You're going to push into that left hand like you're trying to extend the knee. You're going to feel the quads working, but that left hand, here's where the bicep comes in, is going to try to pull that left foot back into that passive range. And then we're immediately going to reverse that. Try to bend that knee more without using that left hand to pull further into that stretch. So we're finding those tissues of the posterior chain, the hamstrings and the glutes, to try to bend more and then release the tension. See if you can get deeper into that stretch. We'll do the isometrics 2 more times. So we're going to push into that left hand as if you're trying to extend the knee, feeling the front of the knee and those quads working here. 3, 2, 1, and then reverse it. Try to bend more. Try to pull that left foot away from that left hand into more knee flexion. This takes a lot of visualization and experimentation. So we're going to try to really just figure out where those tissues are and how to fire those tissues up, and then release that tension. And then we're going to go 1 more time, pushing into that left hand. So we're really just figuring out the functionality of the hamstrings and the posterior chain in that knee flexed position, especially in that end range. And then let's go ahead and reverse that, pulling into that deep knee flexion stretch, trying to activate those tissues in that deep range of motion, which is going to help us own that range of motion, and then release the tissues into that stretch again. So we're going to go straight into, well, you can come out of it if you'd like, but we're going to go straight into our holds, okay? So if you want to go straight up to standing, you can do that. We're going to do 5 reps. So we're activating this position, pulling into as far as you can into that passive range, and we're slowly going to let go. So try not to let that leg bounce away from you. We're going to slowly peel the hand away from that left foot. And as you're letting go, you're not just going to maintain it. You're going to try to bend more and more and more and more. Keep reaching for the hip with that left heel, and then grab back on. Breathe into that stretch. As you exhale, we're going to let go and try to hold again. This time, try to aim for a deeper range of motion. Try not to let it fall away from you. Keep bending for 3, 2, 1, grab back on and release that tension. Again, here's where a lot of cramping happens. It's okay, just punch it out and get back into it. We're really trying to close the gap between that passive range of motion, which is your stretch, and the active range of motion, which is when you let go. So let's go again, 3 more. As you exhale, let go and try to hold that knee flexion, and then try to bend even more. 3, 2, 1. Grab back on. As you exhale, last 2, let go, try to hold. As you let go, try not to let that knee fall forward. Push that knee back, because again, the hamstrings are going to help with that hip extension. Grab back on. And we've got 1 more. Take a deep breath. As you exhale, let go and hold. Keep bending. 5, 4, keep bending. 3, 2, 1 more centimeter, and then grab back on before you come out of that stretch. Release the tissues and the tension here, and we'll slowly come out of it, and we can go into our liftoff. So our first liftoff is that hip extension and knee flexion liftoff. So we'll grab the yoga block, place it behind you from that quadruped hands and knees position. The leg is going to go back. All right, we're gonna try to get those hips as close to the floor as we can to make that lift off challenging. All right, so we're pulling that left hip towards the left heel. Take a deep breath, and as you exhale, we've got that tiny little lift off and hold. 3, 2, 1. Bring that leg down, take a breath. And again, as we exhale, we're gonna lift off. Try to pull that thigh off of the ground or the block. 3, 2, 1, and bring it back down. And exhale, lift off again. The more you lift off, the more you're gonna bend that knee, pull the heel towards the hip, and come back down. Last 2, exhale as we lift off, keep bending that knee. 3, 2, 1, and come back down. Slowly and with control. We've got one more rep. Exhale as we lift up. Keep those hips low. Lift that leg high. Bend that knee more. 1, and release. All right, we can slowly come out of that for our second lift off, which is from that half kneeling position. Okay, place your foot on the block. Again, we want this to be challenging but doable. So we want to lift off from the highest surface possible without allowing compensations to happen. So again, we want that hip to be extended, taking out the wrinkles in the front of your pants or shorts. We're gonna maintain that base position as we lift off into more knee flexion. This is all hamstring here. Lift off and hold. 3, 2, 1. Bring that foot down slowly and with control. Take a deep breath. And as we exhale, let's lift off again. Pulling into more knee flexion. 3, 2, 1. Slowly lower back down. Take a breath. And 3 more. As you exhale, bend that knee. Use those hamstrings. 3, 2, 1. Slowly come back down. And last 2. Exhale, lift it up. Bend that knee. Find those hamstrings. Make sure those glutes are still engaged. Slowly lower. And let's do that one more time. Bend and lift. 3, 2, 1, and come back down. All right, we'll slowly come out of that position and we're gonna finish with our hovers with that hip rotation. Let's go with the block outside of the foot and ankle. So we're starting in that external rotation from the knee or from the hip. Top of the thigh is slightly pointed out. Again, keep that base position nice and solid. Again, the higher the block, the harder it's gonna be. The closer it is to your knee, the harder it's gonna be. Okay. So we're gonna lift up. As we hover, we're going into some internal hip rotation, turning the top of that thigh in towards the center of your body, and bring that foot down. And let's reverse that, lifting up, hover over, and down. Keep breathing. Now we're working through a fuller range of motion, so not just that end range. So that lift off is gonna be a little bit bigger than the lift off we were doing previously. Lift up, hover inside and down. Last 3, lifting up, hover outside of the block. That's our internal hip rotation, and down. You're gonna feel more of your internal. And again, lift up and down. Last 2, up, hover into internal rotation and down. And lift up, hover inside. That's our external rotation. And let's go one more time. Keep that hip extended. And down. And lifting up. Hover inside. That's our external rotation. And finish. All right. Nice job. I hope your hamstrings are awake and feeling worked. We did a lot of work at our end range knee flexion today. So the hamstrings may feel a little bit sore tomorrow. The more you practice, the fewer the cramps. I hope you learned something about your knee flexion today and your hip extension. And if you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. I'll see you next time.